When modern Muslim scholars address the issue of slavery, they have to perform an intricate rhetorical dance. On the one hand, they have to denounce slavery as a reprehensible practice of the past that should never be revived again.
Internet is that this discussion has more academic value than anything else, meaning we're not talking about how to reintroduce slavery in a proper way here.
Allah Azza wa Jal intended for this institution to be something that is not necessary and required. If it's there are laws that governed it for 11, 12 centuries. Now that it's gone, we don't need, those institutions don't need to be brought back. And that's why I don't know of any scholar in our times that is calling for this institution to come back.
But on the other hand, since Islamic law permits slavery, Muhammad himself owned slaves after all, they have to simultaneously argue that slavery in Islam was absolutely peachy, and that being enslaved by Muslims actually meant that your fortunes were truly on the rise.
It's an actual emancipation, and the goal of the Prophet, peace be upon him, particularly with slaves, was to reintegrate them into society. And that's the one thing, if you're going to forget everything that I've said in the first 40 minutes of verses and things of that sort, just remember the goal of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was to reintegrate slaves into society so that they wouldn't just be technically free, but they would actually live like free men and free women. So when it comes to slavery in particular, what was required is treating slaves with so much dignity that they're not really technically slaves anymore. So those that have come into society as slaves are treated with so much dignity that they're not really slaves in the true sense of the word. That's the bare minimum, that they're not going to be abused, they're not going to be exploited.
Right? If you want an analog to what is permitted in Islamic law under certain circumstances and with strict rules and guidelines, the analog is not slavery. The analog is refugee resettlement. That is a closer analog to what is permitted in Islam.
Yeah, refugee resettlement. One wonders in this case why slavery was ever abolished in Islamic lands, since there is no reason to abolish refugee resettlement if that's all that slavery was. Nevertheless, this is the approach that Muslim scholars employ when minimizing slavery. They comb through their religious literature and cherry-pick only those narratives that bolster their case. What I'll be doing here is going over some of the narratives from those same sources that these scholars always leave out. The narratives that they like to pretend don't exist because they completely undermine their case. First, we have this verse from the Quran that places slaves in a separate legal category than that of free men. And free women too, but that's a whole other can of worms which I won't be going into in this video. Then we have these narrations from Muhammad about slaves who run away from their masters. And finally, we have the legal rulings for capturing runaway slaves and returning them to their masters. So let's go over each of them to see how they square with what Muslim scholars say about slavery in Islam. Because these scholars make some very extraordinary claims. Sheikh Yasir Qadhi, for example, who is the chairman of the Fiqh Council of North America, has repeatedly claimed that Islam did everything possible to abolish slavery other than outright banning it.
And as I have said many times, our job is simply to contextualize the past. We're not advocating for anything in the future. And suffice to say that it is very clear that Islam did everything other than outright banning slavery. Okay? Islam did everything other than actually banning slavery. And this is a legitimate question.
Okay, so since Islam did everything it could, then let's take a look at this verse from the Quran. It's verse number 178 from the second chapter of the Quran titled Al-Baqarah, or the cow. It reads, O believers, the law of retaliation is set for you in cases of murder. A free man for a free man, a slave for a slave, and a female for a female. It goes on, but this is the relevant bit. So what does it mean when it says a free man for a free man and a slave for a slave? What if a slave is killed by a free man or a free man is killed by a slave? What is the punishment according to Islamic law in either of these circumstances? So here we have the exegesis of this verse by one of the most important scholars of Quranic exegesis. Here is what Imam al-Qurtubi says regarding this verse. Abu Hanifa and his companions Sufyan al-Thawri and Ibn Abi Layla agreed that a free man is killed for killing a slave, just as a slave is killed for killing a slave. And this is also the opinion of Dawood, and this was narrated reported from Ali bin Abi Talib and Ibn Mas'ud, may God be pleased with them. However, Sa'id bin al-Musayyib, Qatada, Ibrahim al-Nakhai, al-Hakam bin Uyayna, and the majority of scholars said that a free man is not killed for killing a slave, due to the categories and divisions listed in this verse. Abu Thawr al-Baghdadi said, the consensus regarding the one who kills a slave by mistake is that he is only liable to pay the value of the slave. So just as the slave is not like the free man in case of an accidental killing, he's not like him in the case of deliberate killing either. Also, a slave is a commodity like other commodities that is bought and sold, and a free man disposes of him as he wishes. So there is no equality between him and the free man. Imam al-Qurtubi says, this consensus is correct. Okay, so what does this all mean? There are a lot of names in here, so I can see why this might get confusing for people who are not already familiar with Islamic jurisprudence. But just bear with me and I'll break this down. So the author of this exegesis, Imam al-Qurtubi, is saying that there are two opinions among the scholars of Islam on this issue. One group of scholars claim that if a free man killed a slave, the retaliation for this in Islam would be to kill the free man. This is the opinion of the Imam Abu Hanifa and his companions. Now, who is this Abu Hanifa? Well, there are two major denominations of Islam, the Sunnis and the Shias. There are also the Ibadi Muslims, of course, but those are a tiny minority compared to these two groups, so I'm going to ignore them for this discussion. Abu Hanifa happens to be the founder of one of the four existing schools of jurisprudence among the Sunnis. So within the Sunnis, who comprise about 80 to 90% of all Muslims, there are four subdivisions, and Abu Hanifa is the founder of one of these subdivisions. It's named Hanafism after him, or simply Hanafi Sunnis. So the author of this exegesis is reporting that of the four major subdivisions of Islam, the Hanafis, who were the followers of Abu Hanifa, believe that a free man can be killed for killing a slave. But then he goes on to explain that the majority of scholars of Islam, including himself, reject this opinion and claim that a free man cannot be killed for killing a slave, and they cite this specific verse as proof for this belief. So, of the four subdivisions of the Sunnis, three of them claim that this verse of the Quran instructs us that a free man cannot be killed if he kills a slave, but a slave is killed if he kills a free man. And the reason he provides is very clear. A slave is a commodity like other commodities that is bought and sold, and a free man disposes of him as he wishes. So there is no equality between him and a free man. Now, does this sound like fair treatment of slaves to you? You never hear scholars of Islam mention this verse of the Quran when talking about how Islam treats slaves, right? Even though it is explicitly talking about the rights of slaves. But you might be thinking now, well, at least the Hanafi Sunnis mandated equality between the free men and slaves, so at least some Muslims got it right? Now that's a good observation, but just sit tight. I'm just getting warmed up here. I'll show you what the Hanafis actually said about killing slaves in a bit, but for now I want to show you a few other sources that confirm this interpretation of this verse, so you know that I'm not simply cherry-picking here. Here's the exegesis of this verse from the tafsir of Ibn Kathir, probably the most famous exegesis of Quran in Islamic history. The belief of Abu Hanifa is that a free man is killed in retaliation for killing a slave due to the generality of the verse of Surah Al-Ma'idah, and Sufyan al-Thawri and Ibn Abi Layla and Dawood agreed with this. However, the majority of scholars disagreed with them and said a free man is not killed for killing a slave because a slave is a commodity, and if the slave is killed accidentally, no blood money is due for his killing, but rather his value, that is his market value, is due. The majority of scholars held that a Muslim is not to be killed for killing a disbeliever, as was proven in Sahih al-Bukhari in a narration from Ali, who said, "The Messenger of Allah, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, said, a Muslim is not to be killed for a disbeliever." There is no authentic hadith or interpretation that contradicts this. So the same thing that was reported in the previous exegesis of this verse by Imam al-Qurtubi. An interesting fact here is that this second exegesis by Ibn Kathir has been translated into English, but in an abridged form. You can read it for yourself on Quran.com. And would you take a look at that? It excludes the section about free men not being killed for killing slaves in the translation, just completely missing. Almost like the modern translators are embarrassed of what their texts are saying about these issues. And this is something you'll see quite frequently in English translations of these classical Islamic texts. They go out of their way to conceal the embarrassing sections about slavery, just like the modern scholars and apologists of Islam do. They're simply embarrassed of what their faith preaches, so they hide it. But fear not, that's why I'm here. So in that vein, let me tell you about this classic book on Islamic jurisprudence called Umdat al-Salik wa Uddat al-Nasik by the Shafi'i scholar Ibn al-Naqib al-Misri, which has been translated into English with the title Reliance of the Traveler, and can be bought at numerous bookstores including Amazon. And it's not just some ordinary book. This is what Islamic scholars say about it. It is really hard to praise this book enough. It stands without equal or competitor as the primary Sunni manual of Islam in English. There is simply no other book that comes close, bar none. Okay, so a very authoritative book, particularly for Shafi'i Sunnis. But curiously, it too has sections in Arabic that haven't been translated into English. For example, this one here, which translates to, retaliation is obligatory on whoever kills a person purely intentionally and aggressively, that is not in self-defense. But retaliation is not applicable on children or the insane under any circumstances, nor is it applicable on a Muslim for killing a non-Muslim, nor on a free man for killing a slave, nor on a dhimmi who is a non-Muslim living in Islamic lands for killing an apostate, nor on a father or a mother or their fathers or mothers for killing their children or their children's children. Yeah, lovely, isn't it? Not surprising then that the translator chose to ignore this part when translating this manual of Islam into English. And we see the same thing in the Maliki school of jurisprudence too, in the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd. A free man is not killed for killing a slave, but a slave is killed for killing a free man. And a Muslim is not killed for killing a non-Muslim, but a non-Muslim is killed for killing a Muslim. And there is no retaliation for injuries caused by a free man to a slave, nor for a Muslim who injures a non-Muslim. Okay, you get the picture. But hey, at least the Hanafi school of jurisprudence declares that a free person is killed in retaliation for killing a slave, right? At least these guys understood that all lives are equal in value, right? As you can probably tell from the tone of my voice, nope, not at all. The Hanafi school imposed retaliation for killing a slave if that slave belonged to someone else, not if that slave was owned by the person who kills him. As we can see here in Al-Hidayah of Imam Marghinani, a man is not killed for killing his own slave, nor for killing his mudabbar, who is a slave who the master has agreed to set free upon his death, nor for killing his mukatab, who is a slave who has made an agreement with his master to be set free after an agreed upon payment, nor for killing his son's slave. So yeah, no retaliation for killing your own slave, nor your children's slaves. So the equality between free men and slaves is just a mirage even among the Hanafis. They just don't let you get away with killing other people's slaves. And in case you're wondering whether this book is reliable, here is its description from Kitabun.com, a popular Islamic bookstore. It is the corpus of Hanafi law in its approved and preferred form and forges an organic link with the other schools of law. There is no book that can match the power of Al-Hidayah as a teaching manual. Education in Islamic law is not complete without this book. So the official Hanafi position is also that slaves are just property. So if you kill them, you're not killed in retaliation. You just can't get away with killing other people's slaves. So no equality among the Hanafi Sunnis between slaves and free people either. And just for good measure, here is what the Shia Muslims' beliefs are on this issue, in case you're thinking that they might have it different. Allama Hilli, one of the most important Shia scholars in all of Shia history, says in his Nahjul Haq, and the Imamiyya, which is the Shias, believe that a Muslim is not killed for killing a dhimmi. The Imamiyya believe that a free man is not killed for killing a slave. So yeah, the same rules. Okay, so do you see why none of these scholars and apologists speak about this verse of the Quran when talking about slavery in Islam? It explicitly talks about the treatment of slaves. Instead, we hear well-rehearsed, dishonest platitudes like what Sheikh Omar Suleiman says here.
So when it comes to slavery in particular, what was required is treating slaves with so much dignity that they're not really technically slaves anymore.
or what Dr. Shabir Ali says here.
Criminals. So seeing that there was no prison, the way of dealing with prisoners of war was to distribute them within the community to serve as household servants. And so this is what we are referring to when we talk about the slavery within that Islamic context. It's not like the...
Or the most fantastical claim of all, what Imam Tom Fachin says.
Right? If you want an analog to what is permitted in Islamic law under certain circumstances and with strict rules and guidelines, the analog is not slavery. The analog is refugee resettlement. That is a closer analog to what is permitted in Islam.
But if it's not slavery and is instead simply refugee resettlement, then why assign a lower value for their lives? Do refugees' lives not have the same value as that of non-refugees? If they're simply household servants, as Dr. Shabir Ali says, then why are the laws of retaliation different for killing them? Should servants have a different set of laws applied to them than people who hire them? And how on earth are they being, quote, treated with so much respect and dignity, unquote, when their actual lives are being valued lower than the lives of free people? But we're not nearly done yet, so buckle up, it's about to get much wilder. As with all enslaved groups, there will often be attempts by slaves to escape from their captors. This happened among the Muslim followers of Muhammad too, as we will see in a moment. My question is, given the claims made by these apologists about Allah requiring merciful and honorable treatment of slaves, how should Islam see these slaves who run away from their masters? Remember, these apologists and scholars are claiming that
but through the impetus and the encouragement through emancipatory discourse of the people.
And
Okay, Islam did everything other than actually banning slavery.
so, if the slave is running away on his own, then by these notions, he isn't doing anything reprehensible since Islam wants to abolish slavery anyway, right? Again, you can probably tell by the tone of my voice where this is going. Yeah, so not only does Islam teach that God condemns the slaves who run away from their masters, it also legislates a reward for capturing the runaway slaves and returning them to their masters. Let me lay out the sources for this so you can see it for yourself. First is this narration where Muhammad says, when the slave runs away from his master, his prayer is not accepted. So God rejects the salat, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, of the slave who runs away. This narration is in Sahih Muslim, so it is accepted as authentic by all Sunni Muslims. There are numerous such narrations from Muhammad. For example, this from Sunan Nasa'i, which is also authentically reported from Muhammad. The Messenger of Allah said, if a slave runs away, no salah will be accepted from him until he goes back to his masters. And this from Adab al-Mufrad, which is also authentically narrated from Muhammad. Muhammad said, do not ask about 3. A man who parts company with the community, rebels against the ruler and dies while he is still a rebel. Do not ask about him. Or a slave girl who runs away from his master. Or a woman whose husband is absent and who has sufficient provision and then displays her adornments to strangers and mixes freely. And another authentic narration from Sunan Nasa'i, Muhammad said, if a slave runs away, no salah will be accepted from him, and if he dies, he will die a disbeliever. A slave of Jarir ran away, and he caught him and struck his neck, killing him. Yeah, kill him for running away. No trial needed. And why would it? You don't go to trial for destroying your own property, right? So God is actively condemning slaves who manage to escape. Their prayers are nullified until they return to their masters. By the way, this also tells us that these are Muslim slaves who are running away from their Muslim masters, but God still doesn't see it acceptable to allow even Muslim slaves their freedom. Lovely, right? Any surprise that Muslim scholars don't bring up these narrations from Muhammad when talking about slavery in Islam? Alright, but let's move on to the reward for capturing these slaves. Because not only is there divine punishment for these slaves who try to escape, Islam has also instituted a monetary reward for capturing these slaves and returning them to their masters. So all these claims from apologists about Islam having an emancipatory discourse are flat out contradicted by the fact that Muslims are encouraged in Islam to capture these fleeing slaves. First, let's look at the Hanafi teachings, since Hanafis were the ones who instituted retaliation for killing slaves, only for it to turn out that it was only in the case of killing other people's slaves, but not for killing your own slaves. So just in case people have the mistaken impression that Hanafi law is more supportive of the rights of slaves, here is what we read in Al-Hidayah. Yes, this is the same book that I referenced earlier, about which Muslims brag that there is no book that can match the power of Al-Hidayah as a teaching manual. Education in Islamic law is not complete without this book. Quote, Imam Abu Hanifa, the founder of the Hanafi school, said, "Whoever returns a slave who had run off more than a 3-day journey to his master, then the reward is 40 dirhams. And if the slave was returned from less than that is less than a 3-day journey, then the reward is calculated accordingly." Imam Abu Hanifa said, if the slave's price is less than 40 dirhams, then the returner is to be awarded 1 dirham less than the price of the slave. So, for example, if the price of the slave when bought at the slave market was just 30 dirhams, then obviously the slave owner would not want to pay 40 dirhams for getting his slave back. In this case, Hanafi law still doesn't say that, okay, in this case you can let the slave go free. No, you still get paid for capturing and returning the slave to his master. You just get 1 dirham less than the price of purchase, so 29 dirhams. Let's look at some other sources as well. I'm going to go over them quickly since they are all essentially saying the same thing. You can pause this video and go over them in detail if you like. Imam Ibn Qudama reports in his Al-Mughni, it is permissible to capture a runaway slave for whoever finds him. This is what Imam Malik, Ash-Shafi and the people of opinion said. People of opinion generally means Imam Abu Hanifa and his followers in Iraq. We do not know of any disagreement on this matter. If he finds the slave's owner, he should hand the slave over to him if the owner proves his ownership, or the slave acknowledges that he is his master. If he does not find the master, he should hand the slave over to the Imam of the region or his deputy, who should keep the slave for his owner or sell him if he sees a benefit in selling him. Malik and the people of opinion said something similar, and we do not know of anyone who disagreed on this matter. Again, here we see the lie about Islam having an emancipatory discourse. Even if the master of the runaway slave cannot be found, the person who captures him should still return him to the Imam or his deputy. And even this Imam can sell him again if he sees an interest in doing so. Next we have Al-Mawsu'a Al-Fiqhiyya Kuwaitiyya, or the Kuwaiti Encyclopedia of Islamic Jurisprudence. This is a massive encyclopedic work, over 40 volumes, with contributions by hundreds of Islamic scholars, and which took about 40 years to complete, finally being completed in 2005. So it's a modern work. It says, slaves running away from their owners is forbidden by Islamic law by consensus, and this is the defect in the slave. Ibn Hajar al-Haythami and Ad-Dahabi counted this act of running away among the major sins of Islam. The Malikis, Shafis, and Hanbalis believe that the amount of compensation due to the one who returns a runaway slave is what the one who authorized the capture named, or what was agreed upon between the one who authorized the work and the person who captured the slave. The Hanafis believe that the maximum amount of compensation is what the lawgiver has prescribed, which is 40 dirhams, if it is from the distance of Qasr or greater than that, due to the report of Ibn Mas'ud. So, according to preeminent Islamic scholars, not only is slaves running away a sin, it is one of the major sins of Islam. As an aside, the book by Imam Dahabi titled 70 Major Sins has actually been translated into English and can be bought at a bookstore or read online. It lists slaves running away from their masters as the 57th major sin in that list. Finally, in Nasb al-Raya by Imam Zailai, we read, there is consensus among our companions on the principle of reward for returning runaway slaves. However, among them are some who say that the reward that is mandated is 40 dirhams, and others who say that it is other than that. Omar, the second caliph of Islam, ruled that the reward for returning a runaway slave is 40 dirhams. Abi Ishaq said that the reward given for the return of a runaway slave in the time of Muawiyah was 40 dirhams. Ali bin Abi Talib, the fourth caliph of Islam, said that he rewarded the return of a runaway slave with 1 dinar or 12 dirhams. So, to conclude, how does all this square up with the claim by apologists that Islam treats slaves with so much dignity and respect that they are not even slaves anymore? Is valuing their lives beneath that of free people the dignity and respect that Omar Suleiman is talking about? Is God's condemnation of slaves who manage to escape their owners this dignity that he speaks of? Or is God's instituting a reward for capturing and returning them to their masters what he's talking about? Does any of this give you the impression that Islam did everything possible to abolish slavery? And does this in any way sound like emancipatory discourse to you? Or how about,
The analog is not slavery. The analog is refugee resettlement.
yeah, because if a refugee leaves his resettlement home, then obviously God has to condemn him and institute a reward for his capture and return, right? Because a quote-unquote refugee is obviously just a commodity and a free man can dispose of him as he wishes, right? You see the lies that these apologists are telling you? It's lies like these that cause people like me to leave Islam once we uncover the truth for ourselves. And this is just scratching the surface. I didn't even mention the treatment of female slaves captured in war, or how the testimony of slaves is not even accepted in Islamic courts, or any of the other numerous inequalities faced by slaves in Islamic law, because this video is already too long as it is. But I will be working on more material like this which exposes what scholars and apologists of Islam try to conceal from the general public, and will be posting it here, so stay tuned. But the next time some friend or scholar starts quoting the same propaganda about how Islam tried to abolish slavery or gave slaves the same rights as free people, ask them about these Quranic verses and these sayings of Muhammad and these teachings of Islamic scholars. And then watch closely as they deflect and try to change the topic by repeating the same old talking points they always give without addressing any of these points that I've brought up. And then you too can join the club. Because that's when you too will realize that they're all lying to you.